Hey, I'm Mike Squires, and this is a Couches podcast, episode number 123. I've never stated the date in any of these intros before, but I kind of feel like it's important to give some timeline perspective to the conversation. So today is November 1st, 2020. The conversation happened last week, and in 2 days from now, we'll have elections here in the United States. So we don't get down too much on that stuff, but I'm going to start time stamping these conversations. So my guest on this episode is Ian Moore, who's a Vashon Island, which is in King County in Seattle, Washington, up there. Songwriter by way of being, an Austin, Texas guitar hero with a pretty incredibly cool story. Really cool. And, I had met Ian a few times, handful of times over the years, hung out some, and even had some great conversations. But, I got to learn a lot of cool stuff about him in this conversation, which is my favorite part about doing this podcast. So Ian will be doing a live Facebook live concert November 5th at 6 p.m. I'm assuming that's Pacific time. So there will be a link in the description of this podcast to, just go to Facebook and search for it. I don't know how to do that. I'll try to find a link. And if there's a link that I can find now, I'll put it up in the description. He's also doing private songwriting, guitar, and production lessons online. And you can get a hold of him at ianmooreofficial@gmail.com. And if there was ever someone that you could learn something from, it'd be Ian. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. And if you are enjoying the podcast, please go take a look at our Patreon. There's also a link there. I want to take a minute and thank River City Guitars in Spokane, Washington. River City Guitars is an awesome little guitar store specializing in vintage, used, and generally super cool stuff. They're always buying, so if you have some stuff you wanna move, give these guys a call. You can reach out to them at sales.rivercityguitars@gmail.com or give them a call at 509-818-7693. Tell them Squire sent you. Every week I pick something off the website and I feature it here, and this seems like a perfectly good thing to choose, considering it is the tool of many a hardworking blues rock guitar player. Now, this is a 2015, a relict. It's funny because it's in, quote, mint condition, and it's relict. So that's a funny thing to me. 2015 Hanson Strat style. This is in Olympic white, 3 single coils. One interesting thing about this guitar is it's got a mahogany body. I'm not educated enough about Strats to know if Fender ever made mahogany body Strats back in the day, until they started getting interesting with the custom shop stuff and the other, non-traditional stuff. But this thing is a beauty. Mahogany body, maple neck, rosewood fingerboard, my favorite. And it's handsome, not Hanson, handsome. You can get this thing for $29.99 or make them an offer. They're reasonable folks. Thank you so much for listening. Especially right now, don't forget the golden rule. Treat people the way you want to be treated. And don't forget to not be a dick. Yes. Can you hear me? Oops.
What's up, dude?
How are you?
Oh, man. Doing good. We just got some fucking killer news on the Smash front.
Tell me everything.
Yeah, so you know about the thing, right? You know the event I told you?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, and so we got, Duff's part of it. Actually, he signed on. He's doing a thing with Shayna Shepherd. I don't know if you know that chick, but she's this rad kind of like If you met kind of like the chick from the Bell Rays, like this black punk rock like soul singer. Just
Rad.
anyhow, we've been like looking for corporate sponsorship, and which is really intense this year because most
Yeah.
people's revenues way down. So like for instance, I called my friend at Ticketmaster, one of the head dudes, and he's like, yeah, our revenue's down 98%. And I was like, I guess I'm not going to ask you what else good. I mean,
It's
so
good to have a
anyhow,
friend under normal circumstances. It's good to have a friend at Ticketmaster, though.
yeah. But so we've been really like busting ass. And we just got a text from Denise that she'd been in touch with Amazon, which you probably know all this shit pretty well. She got an in, and they're underwriting the whole broadcast portion and using their all of their media stuff to broadcast. So we're gonna have. I mean, it's a huge. It's like I think the in kind donations like $35,000. I mean, they're not giving us the money, but just having
Those
the
resources.
yeah.
Oh,
So
that's
that's
amazing.
fucking awesome. I honestly, Mike, I think the way I look at it is I'd rather fall on a gilded sword and know that I did the right thing. But I
Mm.
was half thinking that this year, with all the money we were putting out to do these videos and all this shit, that we might go under. I mean, I'm not saying it
Right.
couldn't still happen, but just because it's so hard to get corporate donations, we need like a lot. Like we need hundreds of thousands of dollars. So
You
anyhow,
know, when I get big enough, I'm going to go after a CBD company
yeah,
because
yeah,
that's an industry. You know, there are certain companies that'll never advertise, right? UPS, they'll never advertise. FedEx, they'll never advertise, except on Google, right?
yeah, yeah,
Those are entities that they'll always do well, even under lockdown. You know,
sure.
but CBD,
CBD.
I'm
Yeah, man.
telling you, a
You
lot
know
of
what? My buddy Greg, who's helping us out, he was the head of Mopop for a while, and so super good at sponsorship dollars. You know what he suggested, and unfortunately they're down this year. We might that would be amazing. Is Alaska Airlines because Alaska? I'm sure
right.
you probably being connected the way to Seattle and all that. You probably flown it a lot, and like Tom Douglas says the menu, Beatrice cheese is on the thing,
Yeah.
Sith movies are and historically they pay a lot of money for that content. It's just that their revenue's way down right now. Anyhow, I'm gunning for it, man. I'm trying.
It's tough.
Well, let's
Are there
let
any governmental organizations that sponsor the arts? I
kind
know.
of. I mean, they're all well when the country stabilizes a little bit. I think everybody right now is in like kind of trauma zone, trying to put out just because shit's just so fucked up. I mean, I don't think, I know for a fact we're going to be getting civic, state, and hopefully federal dollars.
Yeah.
But um, those are kind of long range plays. We have to survive this year. So that's really kind of like, but yeah, for sure. We're working on that. We're also working on a Murdoch grant right now. That's a capacity building grant. That's like, I think $400,000, but that's for staffing and stuff. So there's money that's still out there, but um, it's really just about like being able to like all the nonprofits. It's like if you just imagine we're all in Oliver Twist. That's what it's like. We're all fucking scrambling for little crumbs of bread. I mean, that's seriously what it's like right now.
I keep having to remind myself because, every episode I ask people to sponsor the podcast. And I feel being grown up in the 90s and having
Yeah,
that sort of like slacker thing and like, oh, well, you don't want to fucking try too hard. Then you seem like a sellout or whatever. Seem like you're trying too hard. Like there's most of that I've cast aside. I've thrown that overboard. But now, what remaining element of that is existing in me is sort of like amplified by the current climate where everyone is just kind of hurting and it feels like an awkward time. But I guess like anyone who's creating stuff or doing something that people can enjoy, um,
yeah,
it does something. It's
Yeah, it does some. I mean, yeah, it's not everything doesn't have to be saving the world to matter.
right.
You know, it's like I think honestly, like I just got off the phone with this friend of mine who's this real heavy literature guy in San Francisco because I've had a lot of people talk to me about writing a book, but it's always this stupid kind of like rock book, and I'm like, I've read and I like, I read every day. I don't care how dumb it is, I'll read it.
Did you read
And
The Dirt?
yeah, of course, dude. Who
So
do you think you're
terrible.
talking to? I know, but it's
So
a fun read,
terrible. Yeah,
right?
that was great. Yeah.
Yeah, Vince. Oh no, no, no. It's Tom. Yeah, Tommy was naked again in the closet, right? For 4 days, I didn't come out of the closet this time. For 4 days, it was a really new bottom. Yeah, I know. But so I was talking to him about, like saying, I actually want to do something cool. I mean, I am a musician. A lot of my stories come from that life, but I kind of have this other idea. And he said, well, he goes, right now, he goes, the most important thing you can do is bring people joy. He goes, honestly, it's like everybody's stressed. Doesn't matter who they are, they're all stressed. So like things that like, and guitar, this is what's cool about guitar. This is something like the cool thing about guitar is that it doesn't matter who you are. You're like everybody that it's this weird cross section of humanity of all different types of people, and it brings people together at a time where everything pulls people apart. So that alone is badass.
I think that generally speaking, music can be that. It's a difficult time for it's a treacherous time for music to bring people together because politics comes up so much, but I mean in the 70s progressives weren't railing against who's his butt? Ted Nugent,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um
Well,
I've
my fan base, I have a really, it's interesting. You get to see this played out on social media whenever I make one of my liberal posts. It's interesting because, I have all my friends from Austin, where I'm from, have all my friends from Seattle, and then like all my buddies from like San Francisco, New York, and they're all liberal. And then I have my kind of fans for when I go on the road, like in Kansas and Nebraska. And a lot of those people, because they're guitar fans, dude, guitar. That's what's interesting about
right.
the guitar is guitar, at least guitar has all kinds of people. It's definitely not like, it doesn't skew in a political direction.
Right.
It really doesn't. It's all kinds of people. So I consider that kind of a gift right now. And I try to be aware of that, even though some of these people drive me fucking crazy. I try to be aware that most people are trying not to be dicks. And even if I think they're being a dick, in their mind, they're doing something to make things better.
Right.
And and I do value the fact that I do have some conservative fans that don't think exactly like me and my friends. And so I try to not totally just ream them every time they say some shit that pisses me off. Try to be a little bit more graceful. And it's not because I'm worried about losing fans, because I've already lost a shit ton of fans because of my beliefs. It's more that I don't want it to be just everybody thinking the same thing. And that's what I like about it.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
What do you I mean, we're already in this political part. I'm recording now, by the way. If there's anything that you've said that you don't want to have included,
I mean, I always talk like this anyhow. This is
yeah.
just,
Okay.
I'm like this. Yeah. I don't really edit. So
And
if I say anything that's really incriminating, please just be cool. Be kind, Mike. We're friends.
What do you know about the Lincoln Project?
I don't know a lot about it. I just know, I know what everyone else knows, that it's some Republicans that really don't like Trump and want to get him out. And, you know, that's all I know. What do you know about
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
it? Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Alliances. I know that one's probably going to be a short-lived alliance, I'm sure, but it
I'm
serves
sure.
its purpose.
Well, I mean, you can hope that is a bridge that won't erode. That's a land bridge that won't quickly erode. Right?
Well, you know what I tell all my friends that are more conservative than me is I was like, let's get out of this crazy, weird ass time where it feels like the world's going to end. And let's start arguing again about, oh, you Democrats are all about, bureaucratic bullshit. And then I'm like, Republicans don't give a shit about the poor. And we can argue about that shit again.
Right.
It used to seem like this big argument. Now it seems almost kind of quaint and sweet, because that's really what it's. I mean, we're not even talking about politics anymore. People are talking about these. It's like this weird. There was some thread that I wrote something, and then it turns into these skirmishes, which I try not to get into. And then one guy said to another guy, "I'm going to fucking kill you." And I was reading it, and I'm just like, it's the internet, and I know it's a comment, but I mean, Jesus, God, that's insane. I mean,
it's a little extreme.
If you say that to someone's face, that gets into a pretty iffy thing. I mean, you could probably, I don't know how that works in terms of like, if it was somebody that I was scared enough of, I might call the cops and go, that dude said he was going to fucking kill me.
If someone said that to me online or to my face, that would not land kindly on my side of the net.
Nope. Yeah.
That's going to take a bad bounce on their side.
It wasn't to me, but I just and that's the thing that like is really interesting about having any celebrity at all, is that, I try to say stuff that I feel like is important. And because I do have a really varied group of people, and it's not just an echo chamber of other progressive people, it devolves into this like fucking, just everybody's like a bunch of orcs fighting in there. And I'm like,
that's terrible.
I used to try to kind of like, well, first of all, I don't know about you, but I don't have time to sit on my phone or computer and do another comment every 5 minutes. I'm trying to like do stuff, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you want to say hi?
Hi.
It's Christine.
Hey, Chris. Oh, hey, Christine. What's up? How's it going?
Let me take a quick left turn. Are you recording your voice with a fucking Neumann?
Duh, motherfucker.
You're a maniac.
Hey, check this out. This is what I use for my guitar lessons.
Right.
This is actually a mic that I built. And this is one that it's mine. This is obviously not it, but this is a U47 style mic that I built. It's point to point. It's badass. It's like one of my main vocal mics that I use when I'm cutting vocals.
How'd you get into doing that stuff?
It's actually kind of a cool story that probably would fit in this podcast.
Everything fits in this podcast, Ian.
Yeah, it does. Like I, at this point, this is what so I don't know how much you know about like the way my career worked. I, at this point where, so I came out, I become a guitar hero right off the bat, right. and it was where my focus was as a kid. I was just so into guitar, and I wrote songs, and I sang, and I was really into singing, but I became a better singer later, and I was a terrible songwriter because all of my focus was really on learning to play guitar, and
that's
writing
pretty
songs
typical with guitar heroes, right?
It's a lot of energy, and still to this day, just trying to practice on a level that makes me feel like my faculties are where I want them to be. I could work all fucking day long just on practicing guitar if that's what I want to do. So I try to divvy it up. Anyhow, I went through this phase where as I started to learn how to write songs, I'm kind of like, oh man, this is awesome. I love songwriting. Wow, that's an A minor chord and I can just write a song on that. There's no riffs. And for me, it was like a revelation because, I grew up with all these amazing singer-songwriters in Texas. I mean, it's like literally singer-songwriter central. And as a young man, I was around them. So I start doing that.
And Guitar Hero Central.
Yeah, which is a whole nother thing. That's a whole nother split. So I start to become more of a songwriter, like trying to emulate like guys I play with, like Joe Ely and all of that ilk, Guy Clark and all those dudes. Well, my guitar fans didn't dig it at all. They hated it. It was, as a matter of fact, they, called me every name under the book and were like just completely baffled. They didn't get it. So I hit a point where I was like, okay, fine, fuck it. I'm not playing guitar at all because it's the only way that I'm going to get the space to work on my songwriting. And I don't know that I even articulate. It was kind of like this weird, just gut thing. So I just stopped playing guitar at all. Like I didn't play guitar, electric guitar, really for like 5 years, 6 years.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Were you playing acoustic or piano?
Yeah, acoustic and writing. And I wrote really good songs. I got a lot better. I feel like I'm not a bad songwriter now. And anyhow, during that time, it just was this weird thing, and I got really into electronics, and I actually started writing or building like guitar amps, like, because that was one of the easier things in electronics to do because they're not that hard to build.
Like a
And then
champ or something?
like what?
Like a champ?
Well, no, like AC30 type amps or like
Really?
Marshall. Yeah, I mean, the original designs are amazing, and those guys were brilliant. But pretty much since then, most amp designers just kind of take piece from a Fender here, piece from a Marshall, have the output section of the Marshall and the block. So it's really kind of building block stuff. And so when you're getting into electronics, it's an easier thing to understand. So I built all these amps, and so I'd build the amps, and I'd come out in my studio, and I'd be like testing the amps out, and then all of a sudden, I'd realize, wow, I just spent 2 hours testing the amp out. I wasn't testing the amp out. I'm playing guitar.
Right.
And so it was during that time that I got, it was a really fun time because I was using the gear. I'd using my mic, recording vocals on songs that I wrote and that I recorded. It was a really cool period for me.
Are you building preamps and
yeah, dude?
Have you built a compressor?
I've built tons. I mean, I've got a rack of like
Outboard gear.
Pultechy, LA2A, 1176, SSL. I built like red style Beatles preamps, old style UA type shit. I built like LA3A type stuff. Couple of Pultecs.
Do you find kits and instructions online, or you find a schematic and go from scratch? Because that sounds like a pain in the ass.
I started out with kits. I didn't know anything about what I was doing. And then as I learned more about circuits, I was able to start kind of improvising a little bit on designs where I'd be like, oh, if you change this, resistor here and this thing here, you can get different frequency response and stuff like that. And, I'm not like a electronic genius, but it's kind of, it's like when I was a young guitar player, I didn't know anything about anything. I couldn't set up my guitar.
Right.
I had guitar techs. I had everybody doing everything for me. I had amp techs. And granted, at that point in Austin, the people that would work on my amps, they were way better than I could ever be. But the other thing that started happening is living up here. There's
For the
only
listener, let's just point out, when you were a young guitar player, you were performing at a higher level than most young guitar players also.
Well, eventually, not right off the back. I spent a few years, touring small clubs like anybody. It took a while, but yeah, things got big for me when I was probably about 23, 24. And then shit was crazy for about 5 years. And it mellowed out basically when I moved up to Seattle. Cause when I was I just literally bailed kind of. I couldn't deal with I didn't like the lifestyle, and I didn't want the path that I was on. And so I guess I kind of parachuted out a little bit.
I like it. I like the vibe you've got going on in your room there. That's a nice little room you got.
Yeah, it's a killer space. It's my garage, and I just turned it into it's actually a 2-story. It's not really 2-story. It's like basically an attic, but you can I made stairs going up there, so all my amps sit up there. I have a lot of my heads off to the right here. You can't see them, and then I can play through a 100-watt Marshall and just have it cranked and record down here. So I have a nice. Cool. It works.
Yeah,
it's loud as fuck up there, but.
So I want to ask you about building a microphone. That sounds insane.
It's pretty insane.
Was that from a kit?
No. The first time, by the time I started building mics, I built from basically schematics. Like I built a U67 style, and you buy like bodies and you have to buy the components. But, at that point I built a lot of stuff.
Right.
Microphones are really more challenging because you have such a high impedance around the capsule. So it's really difficult to know, to test it and to know if you're doing stuff right. And the people that are building mics professionally have really expensive equipment to work on that. So you have to be really careful. I don't think I've ever had one not work, but they're interesting too. What I really like about it is, the U47 style mic. Now, I don't know how much the people that listen to your podcast are even going to be interested or like or whatever, but that mic uses a tube you can't get anymore, and they're like, the tubes are like $10,000 now. So what everyone's done is they found ways to get pretty close to matching the impedance. So that's really where I borrowed people's understand the tube circuit, which drives the microphone, and then you make a power supply, which is actually not that hard to make.
Right.
Pretty simple.
And
that's
crazy.
it. And then it's metalwork and stuff.
I love that. That's like way more, to me, that sounds way more ambitious than writing an album, even, because it's such like dicey water. It's like,
well, I think the thing that I like doing is, that's why I love making records and doing stuff, is it's always dicey water, because you never really know what you're making, especially if you're the kind of, like, my records are so different from record to record. Like, I just don't ever know anything really. I'm just kind of flailing around, like, and I'm like, wow, that's actually pretty fucking cool. I'm trying to do my best. I try to be workmanlike and consistent, but it's like you know how it is, dude. You go and you in to make a record, and maybe you think it's gonna be the greatest record in the world, and you come out and it didn't do it, or maybe you didn't really have expectations and you come out and you made just an amazing record, and you just never know. I mean, that still happens to me, man. My most successful record was in a long time was the record Strange Days. I released it myself. It was kind of like I didn't like, the Lossy Coils were falling apart. So this group I'd kind of put together. So I just I was kind of by myself again, which has happened to me a bunch of different times in my life. Get all these dudes together, people together, make some stuff, awesome for a while. Then things kind of fall apart. And then you're like, what am I going to do? And you freak out. And that record ended up being super successful for me. It's the most money I made on a record. Everyone seemed to love it. I never know, like, right? You make the record, right. You finish it, and you like I love the last record I made, Toronto. I was like, oh, because I love big melodic rock, like kind of like ballsy power pop is kind of like my jam, really. And as far as songwriting, and I was like, oh, people are going to freak out. And I mean, people like it. It's not like they don't like it, but nobody's like going, dude, that's so, I don't hear that. And I thought everyone was going to like flip out, you never know.
When you're so close to something, it's hard. I mean, it's impossible to look at it through someone else's eyes, right?
Yeah. Yep. Unless you can just, that's probably one of the biggest superpowers in the world. I mean, I actually do, even though I'm kind of the antithesis of like, what's that dude's name? I always think of him. Who's the guy with the cool hair? Mark Ronson. Oh. That guy's really good at what he does. You know what I mean? And and obviously he's really probably has traits that are very different from me. There'd be parts of him that I wouldn't like if we were close, because he seems really trendy, but that's what allows him to visualize, making stuff that's just badass. And I like to I think of myself more like a thrift store. Like, I like to be in the weird bins that no one else is looking through, listen to music that no one else is listening. That's kind of my jam, right. And even as a kid, like, when I was growing up, I was a punk rock kid, culturally, not musically. I wasn't interested in the music. All the shit that I liked, like, my dad was really into blues and stuff. Man, when I started playing guitar, I kind of went through this little punkabilly, rockabilly phase, and immediately got into like blues, and like real blues, not Stevie Ray Vaughan, Jimi Hendrix, but like blues. And I remember like trying to find kids my age, for instance, to play with.
Right.
Nobody, not one. I mean, I literally couldn't find, and this is in Austin. Nobody was into it. And even though it sucked, it was also kind of cool, because it was like my little thing that I mean, I'm not saying, I mean, obviously as a guitar player, a billion guitar players have been into that and are into it. But whatever your trip is, and when you go off on your own thing, that's my favorite part of music, is just tripping out on like that record that, like Texas Cannibal, Freddie King. That was like my Bible, literally my Bible.
So when you're talking about blues, you're talking about electric blues. You're talking about like
mostly Kings. Electric blues. Yeah, like I liked all that kind of stuff. I loved Lightning Hopkins. Even as a kid, I loved Mississippi Fred McDowell, Reverend Gary Davis. I loved all that stuff, but I was 18. I had that. I wanted to fucking rock in my own way. And so electric blues really spoke to me, like really Albert King,
Who was that
Freddie
stud that
King.
played with Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters? Who was
Oh,
that?
dude. Oh, my.
Sumlin.
Hubert Sumlin. Oh, my God. Check this out. This is going to fucking blow your mind, dude. When I was 18 in Austin, so Clifford Antone, the guy that owned Antone's, he was basically a drug dealer. So he moved weed, and that's how he underwrote the club. And he ended up getting busted eventually. But at the time, in the late 80s, when I was starting, I would literally ride my bike up to Antone's on weekdays, like while I was, in school, and I couldn't go in. So I'd sit outside, and the waitresses would bring me like sodas and shit. Hubert Sumlin lived in Austin. Clifford Antone had him on retainer, and Hubert Sumlin, this is insane. Hubert Sumlin would play 2 times a week, 3 times a week, Mondays and Wednesdays. There's Monday blues night, and then this Wednesday night. And Mike, there was no one there. There was no one there. There would maybe be 5 people there. It was like dead nights on a Monday or Tuesday.
He was essentially like the house band. He was
house band. Well, the house band was George Raines, who now plays with Jimmy Vaughn, Mel Brown, who's a lot of people don't know, but is a legend. I mean, he's from Canada. He's this dude that's a ton of records on like chess and stuff. But they were just people that had fallen through the cracks.
Right.
And occasionally, like, it would typically be Denny Freeman or Derek O'Brien, who are 2 huge influences on me. But, if Jimmy Vaughn was in town, he'd come show up there. I remember, like...
And on those occasions, would people show up to the club, or was it really low key and just sort of?
It was super low key. Like you'd literally be there. There were a couple. Over the years, you'd see like, I don't know, Bonnie Raitt would sit in. I remember like one of my first, really, and still one of my favorite artists is Nick Lowe, and him and Dave Edmond around Rockpile time were hanging in Austin all the time, dude. And so they'd come in, and again, I'm like this 14, 15-year-old kid, like loved British music because who doesn't?
Right.
And these guys that had these pompadours and looked super cool with a British accent, kind of like, and I just remember
they always dressed smart too.
Oh, they looked amazing. And They had, beautiful women with them. And it was like, it'd be a Monday or Wednesday night because they'd be in town from a big gig, like a festival they played. And then they would hang out in Austin for like a couple of weeks. And yeah, so, that was kind of probably part of what was exciting, because I knew there was all this stuff happening that maybe a lot of other people weren't looking at. And there was this kind of buzz. But yeah, I'd see Hubert play. I played with Hubert probably 20, 30 times.
Really?
Later as I was coming up. Yeah. He was probably for about 5 or 6 years he was living in Austin,
Wow.
And Clifford just had him on retainer because nobody cared about him at that point. Like, it was weird. It was.
Were you playing gigs at Antone's as an underage kid, going in and then leaving between sets or anything like that?
No, I didn't. So my background, I grew up playing violin, but I started playing guitar when I was 16. I had all of my tendons were cut. It's just a long story, but I basically got in a huge fight with my mom. All this collective trauma in my family. My mom was drunk. We got in this fight. I fell on her wine glass, cut my tendons. I was first chair violinist in Austin. I was a prodigy. I was going to probably go play symphony music. But my whole life, I'd grown up with my parents going to this club called Soap Creek and this other club called the Armadillo. I'd always wanted to play guitar. Always. Like, I was obsessed with the guitar. My mom basically wouldn't let me play when I was 6, when I wanted to play. So I didn't start playing guitar till I was 16. I got my cast. I don't know if you can see, but there's like a big crescent shape.
Sure.
All of my tendons were cut. So my mom felt so guilty. My mom got sober the next day, was sober for the rest of her life. She felt so guilty that she got me a guitar. And I remember, like, well, first of all, I couldn't use my hand for about a year because
it was a 1-year rehabilitation.
Well, yeah, my hand still doesn't work right, but it when I very first started playing.
You fooled me, Ian.
Well, no, so I'm not interested in being like a shredder player. That's not really the way I play. But if I wanted to, I couldn't. I don't have the dexterity to play super fast light. It doesn't. My hands don't work that way. They cramp up and stuff. So it's good that the route that I went on, because work with my hands. But
So wait a
you
minute.
know,
This is an interesting point in the dynamic of your family, because your mom was like, "You're not going to play any of that rock and roll music," and your dad, being a blues fan, he's probably like, "Fuck yes, my prodigy musician son is
he
gonna
loved it.
he's gonna excel."
My dad's passed too, but like when I first started playing, he would hang out, like he would go to all the shows and like hang out backstage. There'd always be all these, young, pretty girls. And he'd be like, "Dude, that's my," totally trying to pick these girls up. And actually, I hated it at the time, but now it's one of my best memories. Is like he was so excited because my dad wasn't really a musician, but he was a huge music fan, and he was friends with everybody. Like he grew up with everybody. Like my brother and I went to like we were at Willie's First Picnic in '74. I went to Fandango
Wow.
in Memorial Stadium for ZZ Top. We grew up seeing the T-Birds and Stevie Vaughan and Doug Somm and Rocky Erickson, and those guys were all friends of my dad. So when I started playing and those dudes started coming to my show, my dad was like, I was like the high school quarterback for about a year for my dad. Like he was really psyched. It was really cool for a little while, and then it started to not be cool, but it was cool. It felt great for a little while when I first started building, and everybody was excited about me, because I was always kind of like I was kind of a, like anybody, like probably most music, I was a little bit shy. I was definitely quieter than a lot of other kids, and so it was fun for a while.
Wow. So okay. So really, you don't start playing until you're 17.
Well, probably
Guitar.
16. I mean, the first time I ever, like, I was fucking around on guitar. And what was weird about it was, even though I was a really good violinist, violin is so different from guitar. I mean, granted, I understood, I could read music.
Right.
I understood a lot, but like, as an example of just how much I didn't understand, I remember one of the first songs I tried to learn was Night Moves by Bob Seger.
Oh, great song.
That's so simple, right? It didn't dawn on me that those were chords. Like I was just playing like D, 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 C, G, G,
Right.
And then
I think it's an F, Ian.
What's that?
I think it's an F.
Oh, damn it. Maybe that's what was wrong. I don't really remember like all the transitions. I remember I was really into I was really into 50s and 60s music, but I always have been. I loved Little Richard. I loved like Buddy Holly. I loved all that kind of stuff. And I remember, like, as a matter of fact, I think one of the first solos I learned was "That'll Be the Day." I still love that solo, that kick-ass. That's like a badass. And a lot of guitar players in Austin, that was always really cool. Like, it wasn't cool to be like a metal shredder in Austin. It was all about like being able to quote this super hip old music. So like all the dudes I was seeing could play like that.
Right.
So I remember learning that. And then the big night for me, which I've had a chance to tell Buddy this, was the 10th anniversary at Antone's. So that was 1984, 85. When I was like a sophomore in high school, I think, maybe a junior. And anyhow, it was like the guitar year. And it was Otis Rush, Albert King, Hubert Sumlin, Buddy Guy. Everybody was there. Every player was there. Everybody was there. It was like literally the greatest guitar for what I was into. And I remember going, and Buddy Guy had basically not really been playing for a while. And like, I don't know what had happened. He'd kind of fallen off. And all these other dudes had been kind of, playing through it. Albert, they'd all kind of gone through lean years, because when Southern rock hit, blues died. And there's kind of like they couldn't really get gigs. They did okay in Europe. They play like Austin and Chicago, but they couldn't play anywhere in the Midwest or anywhere in the Southeast for a while. So Buddy shows up, and it was basically like a reintroduction to the blues world for Buddy Guys. I know he's big again now. And that motherfucker shows up on stage, and I can still remember, like, I knew who he was. I already had like some Buddy Guy stuff, and I knew that he was kind of influence on Hendrix. I knew things about him, and The records were cool, but you know, used to have to play really clean back in the day on Chess Records. So I didn't really know. I wasn't prepared. And like Otis Rush had just played, and Otis Rush, still one of my favorite guitar players in the world, and killed it. You know, huge influence on Peter Green. I mean, anytime anyone's quoting Peter Green, I'm like, you ever listen to Otis Rush? Because that vibrato that you guys are all tripping out on, that's Otis. So Otis kills it. He gets off stage, and I remember Buddy Guy gets up, and to my brain and soul at the time, I had never. He was like literally showed up, and it was one of those like, fuck y'all, I'm the dude. And he played like that. And it wasn't the way he does it now where it's real show. I mean, it was showboaty, but it was like feral. And it felt like what Rain Wolf wants to be. That's what it felt like. It had that kind of like, fuck you, like really intense, but he's smiling the whole time. And I went home and I didn't go to sleep that night. And that's the first night when I stayed up all night. I had to go to school the next day. And I remember just like I learned more in that, you know, 8-hour period than I probably have at any other point in my life. And pretty much from then on, I kind of started getting some traction because I you know how it is with guitar, like, because I'm teaching people right now during COVID, and you see them, they're hitting a wall, and then they have a fucking breakthrough. Right. And that was like a huge breakthrough for me.
That is incredible. So I had a technical question about transitioning from playing violin to playing guitar, because while sure you hold a string down against the fingerboard, there are a lot of differences. For one, you're using a pick or a plectrum. You use a pick, yeah? You're not a finger guy?
Well, I'm
hybrid.
You know, it's funny. I used to say, I mean, I do. I hold a pick. I'd say I use a pick about 30 or 40% of the time now. But yeah, I do play with a pick.
But you know, a big part of blues music and the expressiveness of playing notes is bending notes, and you simply can't bend notes on a fretless instrument.
No, you're right.
Your intonation is established in a completely different relationship to the fingerboard.
Yep.
Was that something that you quickly got over?
I don't know. I mean, you know, the other thing that's worth noting is even before I played the violin, the first instrument I ever played, I was a little kid, was a sitar. And I loved that thing. And I still remember, like,
your dad was a hippie.
My dad was a Buddhist scholar. We lived in India. So so a lot of my earliest, and I still love a lot of those tonalities. So really the bending thing, really, and as a matter of fact, especially when you listen to like guys like Albert King, where they really overbend and it's like, and it's way up there. And I love that. Like the more like it's kind of almost atonal to Western ears. I don't know. I don't remember, but I do know what I do know. And it's funny because this literally just really started happening the last couple of days. I've been teaching guitar now for however long I've been home, 6 months, 7, whatever. I don't even know what month it is anymore. It's like weird COVID time. But what's been interesting is that when I was a young player, and I didn't think about this until I started teaching, I spent most of my time working on bends and vibrato. To me, more than, and well, phrasing too, but like just the different types of vibrato. And I'm realizing now when I'm trying to teach people that, you know, having a few different ways of vibratoing is pretty foreign to most rock players. It's like if they have any vibrato at all, they have one kind that they just kind of put in at the end of a legato phrase.
Right.
You know, and like, but with blues players and people that are playing more in that realm, vibrato is kind of your focal point, you know, and vibratos and bends. Those are my favorite parts of playing. And like, I'm like, this is what I end up doing with these, because I get these dudes that can like play all over the neck, but they're really frustrated because they just don't feel any order to it. It feels kind of random. And I'm like, I get that. It's like it's like you've been driving your whole life at 1,000 miles an hour and you're crisscrossing the country back and forth and going here and going there, but you never saw it.
Right.
And there's all this territory. And when you hear someone like Blake Mills is a great example of a really good guitar player that really knows how to milk the shit out of something, you know what I mean? Or like Richard Thompson's a great example of that. Or like, you know, I mean, or the dudes like Stevie Ray Vaughan, guy that I grew up with. doesn't have a giant bag of licks, but every one of them's fucking epic.
Oh yeah.
And they're just perfect. He's like distilled them down because he bends this way and then he vibratos this way. And like, it's really cool, man, to realize how many different ways you can approach the instrument. And I guess I never really thought about it because I just always played it the way I play it.
Right.
And now that I'm having to teach people, I'm going, oh,
Think
I guess
about
this
it.
is
Right.
just one way to do it.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
Holy shit, what a crazy time and way to grow up. Like what an opportunity for you to be a musician, be in that environment. It just was a perfect storm.
Yeah, it's cool. I kind of feel a little bit like an outlier though as a guitar player. Like living up here in Seattle, I don't really have, the language, and it's kind of like what I believe in. And I mean, like, you know how it is, dude. Like we all as guitar players, we love each other, and like I love jamming with everybody, but I just kind of feel like all my people are kind of gone. There really aren't a lot of people that come that have the same, you know, the same thing that, you know what I mean, like really turn that the same thing where you're playing and you're super turned on by the trip that you're on. And it's funny because when I was young, I really took it for granted, and I just assumed that everybody played that way. Because again, I was growing up in Austin, but now it's kind of like this lost thing. It's like
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, and I'm remembering now and kind of taking a step backwards, is you're not doing any improvising as a violinist. Typically, you are reciting music off of a sheet of paper. Now,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, you're playing guitar, and perhaps there's a chord progression or a chart in front of you, but really, there are no rules.
I love that. And that's what I like about it.
What was that something that you immediately thrived in? Was that a
Yeah. I love classical music. It's still some of my favorite music, but the culture around it, I felt like I was living in the physical manifestation of an old lady's doily.
yeah? It's pretty
You know?
stiff.
Yeah, it's real stiff. It
Starched,
felt
starched doily.
starched, yeah, well starched, and ironed and pressed again. It just felt like I was really young when I started playing violin, and then as I got older, I started really kind of I was already kind of struggling with it, and I remember I had this arch nemesis, Jennifer Borjanoff, we were always competing for first chair, and she practiced a lot more than I did, so she often beat me because she was practicing, and I just remember I kind of hated her because everybody was just so prim and proper, and everything was so and I loved people like Itzhak Perlman, and then I really got into like Stefan Grappelli, and I remember my mom was trying to get me really into like more like Western swing, like where I think in her mind it's like, oh, you can get into this and you can improv, but I was just over it. I mean, and when I first picked up the guitar, the rawer it was, the more I wanted it, and not necessarily in the rock and roll way, but just like that, like blues, and just fucking close your eyes and feel. And I still really love that. I mean, I like I like things that seem to be simple that aren't.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I'm the same way with food. Like I love a great pasta dish or like a Vietnamese dish or shit that doesn't maybe seem like hot cuisine or something, but it's like amazing. That's the same way to me with music. Like I love I just I love that. I love music like that. I love stuff that I've just really been thinking about. I mean, you're probably getting a lot of really philosophical dudes right now during COVID because we're all sitting
Yeah.
around at home by ourselves for hours. It's like the simpler when you take all the form out of it and it's just like a blank thing, then all there is your soul.
Sure.
And I really like that. I mean, I've really come back. Like I got really away from blues, and I was about as far away from that as I possibly could be. And I've been talking to my older son about this. I'm really coming back into it and really going, man, I'm remembering why I loved it so much and why I saw it as high art and didn't
Right.
see it as this generic thing that some people see it as. I really dig the palette and being able to do anything with it, you know?
I'm not going to ask you very many more violin questions, but I have one or two more.
Yeah, I love
Do you
talking
still
about
have
violin.
one? Do you
I
have
do,
one?
yeah.
And do you
Yeah,
play it? Do you play it like fiddle style? Like, are you doing that, or are
no, I
you?
still play violin. I'm my kids both play violin, and I think Max, my older son's really into recording. He keeps stealing all my studio gear. So I think he has my main. I have a really expensive violin, and it's funny because I took it on this one tour about 12 years ago, and it got kind of fucked up on the tour. And I took it to this violin repair guy here in Seattle, and the dude looked at me and he's like, "You are an idiot. You can never take this violin on the road. This violin is worth thousands and thousands of dollars." So,
Right.
but I got it when I was really young, and I think at the time my dad probably paid like $1,000 or $1,500 for it.
Right.
It's beautiful. I'm okay. I can still, like, I still will play, like, if I'm in the studio and I want like a string part, and maybe I'll lay down like some fake violins and I'll put, I'm
Yeah.
okay. It's just my the thing about violin is the micro, it's the little teeny micro movements. And when
Right.
you're playing guitar so much, you're just like a dyna. You're like, it's really hard to play in tune for me.
Right. Could you imagine being a trombonist? That sounds terrible.
I can't imagine it on any level, man. I think I actually have a really good friend in Austin who's a one of the best musicians in Austin, John Blondell, and he's a trombonist. And he played, I don't remember who all he might have even toured with, like Steely Dan or something. He's a really heavy dude, and I remember, like, he always was really funny about it because he took so much shit for playing the trombone.
Right.
Just a weird instrument. People take a lot of shit.
There's kind of, sometimes there's nothing sweeter than a trombone solo, though.
Sometimes there's nothing sweeter than a flute solo. Sometimes.
No, I do enjoy the flute.
I do too.
Yeah.
In the right, like Ruby Tuesday, the flute solo in that is just one of my favorite musical moments. But I will admit that when somebody shows up with a flute and asks if they can sit in it, scares me most of the time, if I'm being honest.
You don't look at him and say, "Can you go back out to the car and get your sax?"
You got a soprano in that car?
Yeah. Sure.
Oh, guitarist.
Man, what a time to be in Austin. Also,
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
it's such a weird little bubble island. Also, capital city, which are notoriously weird. Like, usually the weirdest city in any state is the capital.
Yeah, that's totally true. And a lot of people don't know that if you don't tour, because you probably just know the capital in your state. But yes, true.
Almost always the weirdest.
Yeah, Sacramento.
Right. Sacramento's super weird, man. They all feel vaguely like kind of like Tacoma. They feel like they're like, all right, let's build a city. Whoa, not too big.
Yeah.
Keep
it small, and then we're going to have a lot of government stuff. Well, what was cool about Austin is that it had a lot of resources. There were a lot of colleges there, but for some reason, no big businesses cared about it. As a matter of fact, when I was a kid, if you were from Austin, like, and you'd be like on a plane and there's some dude from Dallas or Houston or some bigger city, they'd always kind of like, oh, Austin. Like, it was kind of like this, oh, you guys, just everything that we were about was kind of a joke to any other city, which is why
original Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, it's exactly like how Portland was. It takes a while, and then it hits a tipping point, and then all of the stuff that they made fun of becomes consumable to the masses, and then everybody comes in like fucking hordes of Huns, and takes what they need.
Do you have any idea of how Austin, like the history of Austin, how it became this sort of island for hippie type culture?
Yeah, I do, because my dad was one of the first people to my dad came in 1958 from El Paso, and what was happening is that the beatnik culture was kind of unfolding. And so the first wave of kind of, the weirdos, as far as I'm aware, were kind of like people that were trying to be kind of like the Beats, like people like my dad. And there was this place called the Chuck Wagon that was on the UT campus. It's where you'd eat.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the writers, I mean, like So Joseph Campbell was hanging out there, and Bill Moyer. Joseph Campbell's the dude that wrote many Hero of a Thousand Faces, and so there's all this kind of emerging kind of Eastern stuff. That's how my dad ended up there, and it was cheap. It was in the middle of a very, very conservative region, but it was slightly more liberal than the other places. So
It
people would
certainly is a
escape to Austin.
beautiful part, the most beautiful part of Texas.
It's pretty, and honestly, I think there were, yeah, it's just a like anything. It's like it was just a little secret that lasted long enough, and people could be there, and for the most part, not get hassled. You didn't have to work a lot to live, so it attracted a certain type of person. I mean, even when I was a kid, I had a house, and this is well into when there were plenty of people that had already bailed on Austin because it had gotten too corporate. But when I was, I graduated high school in '86, so I went to college for about a year and a half before touring just took over. But me and my best friend had a house in West Austin, which is kind of where the rich people live now. It kind of, I mean, that kind of always kind of was, but it was more mellow. And the house was $400 a month, wood floors, three bedrooms, dude. It had I mean, it was insane. And it was, I mean, that's so like when I was a kid. So here I am starting to play music. I have to come up with $200 a month plus, a little bit for groceries.
Right. There's no cell phone. You probably didn't have insurance on your car.
Electrical bills were like $20 a month. I mean, our bills were so low. I worked a summer before my first year in college. I was starting to play gigs. I mean, back then we were making like nothing when we played a gig. You'd make like, $40 amongst three people, which is about what you make in Seattle now playing a gig. Right. For most gigs, right? If you're not like on a big gig. And yeah, it was just, you could live really cheap. And, I think it gave a lot of people the opportunity to just kind of fuck around and figure out if that's what they wanted to do, because music's a strange life to undertake. It's not really, especially if you're not going the route of like, oh, I'm going to go to Berkeley music and then I'm going to get a degree in this. Like, right. People could just kind of dip their toes in. And a lot of my friends, played music for a little while and drifted into film or other arts or corporate gigs or whatever they did. But it gave you the opportunity to check it out, see if it's a lifestyle you wanted,
It's a crazy lifestyle. And sometimes when I hear people say that being a musician is easy work or whatever, or that musicians are lazy somehow.
Yeah, I hit those people.
Man, it drives me fucking crazy because it's because those people typically have no idea what hard work is.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about myself because I don't want to sound. I work really hard, but I will say that the people like the dudes in my band that are the sidemen in my band, they hustle more. I mean, it's crazy how hard they work to make that life work out. Yeah. Like, I can't do this from 2:15 to 2:30 because I've got a lesson on the road while we're touring. I mean, just crazy shit to just survive so they can play music. I'm not kidding about like any motherfucker tells me that musicians are lazy. Maybe in the 70s, not anymore. Not anymore. It's like I tell because my older son wants to be a musician. I'm like, if that's what you want to do, man, I totally support it. But you better be ready to work your ass off, because if you really want to do this for a living and that's what you want to do and you don't want to have another job too, you better be ready to pull out all the hustles that you've ever thought of, one after another.
And also be ready to actually have another job for
for
at least part of the time, at least a part-time job a lot of the time.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the decision that people have to make. Like, what do you do? How do you want to do? Like, the thing that's frustrating for me is I'm a really hard worker. I'm really driven. Whatever I did, I would work really hard at it. And the fact that I do music as for my living, I'm super grateful that I can pay my bills, but it's fucking stressful, dude. I'm 52.
Yeah.
And it's really just like about 4 or 5 years ago that I finally wasn't like going, can I pay my bills this month? I mean, right. Ironically in my 20s when I was selling, I sold almost 500,000 copies of my first record. I didn't make any money. I mean, right. Everybody knows that story, and it's been a great life. I love the choices I've made. I'm really grateful for whatever balance I have. but financially it's been really stressful. And I'm not saying it like woe is me.
No,
I'm
of
just saying
course
it
not.
to kind of illustrate that this is the reality. Or like when I think of like one of my best friends, this guy JJ Johnson, one of the greatest drummers in the world, just literally was, he played drums with Tedeschi Trucks and Lenny Kravitz, John Mayer. He's like a badass,
Real deal,
serious
dude.
drummer. He's doing all right and works his ass off. And the other thing that happens, and this is part of like why I started Smash, is like every single person who's a touring artist, like, and I'm just thinking of like JJ, but could be talking about myself or anyone, has injuries all over their body, like
Right.
bad knees, bad shoulders, and you can't stop touring long enough to get that shit fixed.
Right.
So you
There's
just play
not an
through
off
it.
season.
There's no off season. Yeah, it's not like football where you get your knee operated on and then you rehab and you're ready for spring practice,
Right.
Yeah.
So one real quick question.
Yep.
What was the last straight gig you had? Like, what was the last gig you had before you were like, fuck this, I'm not answering to someone? Like, did you have like a bookstore or a record store gig or?
No, the last job I had, I worked, it was actually pretty funny. It was at a high school and I worked at this barbecue restaurant and, I was kind of growing my hair out because I had a pompadour when I was in high school. I was really into rockabilly, like I said. So I was kind of growing my hair out. It was getting kind of long.
Did
And
you
the
have a
barbecue
pompadour when you were playing violin in the?
I was super into like 50s stuff. So I was really like, I was pretty funny.
Great.
The kids used to always call me Fonzie, and I'd be like, "Fuck you, I'm not Fonzie, I'm Elvis," like. And so I start growing my hair out. I'm like 18 years old, and I worked at this barbecue restaurant. And the lady Joyce, the kind of older lady that owned it, was so conservative and hated hippies. So she would make me wear a hairnet even though I didn't serve food. I was actually just washing dishes and cleaning,
right.
because she knew all the people that went to Austin High, where I went to high school, went to this restaurant. And she knew that me as a person that had already graduated, serving kids younger than me while wearing a hairnet would, in her mind, would get me to cut my hair. So I was really psyched. That was the last job I did. I've had to what I have had happen. Like I remember about 10 years ago, I had a tour fall through. We were living out here in Vashon, and I literally had no money at all, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I called my friend Tom up. It's pretty funny because serious humble pie. I just played a show at Antone's and my opening band, and we sell the place out. It was, because I'm doing well, but the opening band was Los Lonely Boys, and like my old manager managed them, and they just put out their record that had their big hit song on. So I have to join. So I joined my friend's construction crew for like 3 weeks when this tour was supposed to be, because and I'm like literally the lowest person on the whole. Like I'm working underneath the teenagers, and these little punk ass bitches are telling me what to do. And I'm sitting here carrying like scrap lumber while the radio's playing, and the band that opened up for me 3 weeks ago, their song is nonstop on the radio. And I just remember like, fuck you. Like it was pretty funny, but I mean, the good thing about all that stuff is, and this is another thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, is even if you were arrogant, there are very few people that are not forced into humility. Like,
sure,
it doesn't matter. Even if you're in the biggest band in the world, at some point you're going to be not cool. And at some point people are going to make fun of you. And at some point nobody's going to give a shit about what you have to say. And it's good for you, because you have to be humble. And then the other thing is that, people like me that are out there scrapping it out, they're trying so hard. Like you meet dudes like I'm thinking about like Billy Gibbons and Keith Richards, like some of my idols. Those dudes are, I wouldn't maybe use the word humble, but they're just so cool and they're so gracious. And then you go, okay, I need to check my ego a little bit, because I'm not that big a deal, because that's fucking Billy Gibbons or that's Keith Richards, and that dude's not like that. So fuck me, So it's all that stuff's good. I mean, that's the last. I've never really. I've never had another gig, but it probably, if I was smarter, I probably would have had another gig. I just never, I just kind of stayed in this game.
Did you ever have were you ever a side player for anyone?
I did a couple of times. I did. So when I was 21, my career was taken off, and no, I was like 20, and it was moving too fast. Like I said, I've been trying to learn how to write songs. My songs were terrible, and I was starting to get some label interest, and I didn't know how to put the brakes on. So this was the best move ever. I took a gig playing guitar with a guy named Joe Ely, who's a legend in Texas, and he he's kind of like Guy Clark and Townes Van Zandt. As a matter of fact, he covered a lot of those tunes. So like through him, first of all, I learned a lot about songwriting because that's his world. Like
Yeah.
Lucinda Williams was our opening act for a while on that tour.
Wow.
Everywhere we went, we'd hang out with Guy Clark and all these dudes, and so that was great. Um, and it just kind of gave me a little bit of perspective on like I got to put the brakes on a little bit, and then right after that, I played with Joe for probably like a year and a half. We did a couple of epic European tours because like the Clash loved Joe. Like when the Clash came to the U.S., Joe opened part of that tour, and so like
Wow.
we got to hang out with like Joe's royalty. So getting to be around him at like 20 was pretty badass. And then I put out my first record. So that was really my only extended about 7 years ago. I took a gig with Jason Mraz. My friend was a musical director. Same deal. I was literally like completely broke, but that's not why I took the gig. I took the gig because the dude that played with him was one of the best harmony singers in the music business, and I had to replace him. And I wanted to see if I could pull it off. And I also kind of wanted to see, because I always would tell people, like when you're sitting around having a drink, that like I didn't like that world and that I made the decisions of my career to kind of get away from it. And I kind of was like starting to second guess myself, like maybe I was full of shit. And I went out and I did it, and we played, 10, 12,000 people a night or whatever he was playing to. I hated it.
Really?
I hated it. I didn't like anything about it. I mean, granted, it wasn't my scene musically and stuff,
Right.
but I didn't like the people around. I didn't like, I don't like being on a tour bus. I mean, I like that it's comfortable, but it feels weird to me when you're on a tour bus. I always feel like I'm on a satellite going around the
Right.
galaxy. And when you're in a van, I mean, yeah, it's harder, and yeah, there's, but you drive into town, you're in the town, you go do stuff. It just feels more like you're on the ground level of what's going on.
Right.
And I remember after doing that tour, we put out El Sonido with Lossy Coils right after that. And I was so grateful to just be doing my thing. I kind of needed to do that because I was kind of like, maybe I'll be a sideman. And just that way I don't have to have all the pressure of
Right.
making all the decisions. And then, I would still like, if it was like a super cool band, like I played with Rocky Erickson, like that time we stayed at your place.
Wow.
Well, you are at Christine's place. You guys had
Right.
just gone together, and I forget how it worked, but
might
she
have
wasn't
been
there.
out. Yeah.
That was the night that Matt got really drunk and tried to kill me. But like I played with Rocky for a while, and I loved that, But even then, man, I mean, I don't know. I like just kind of I like doing my thing.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Did the experience of being a sideman to Joe inform sort of and observing him as a leader inform the way you ran your band when you came back to that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, he was so cool, and he's just cool. I mean, Joe's just cool. He did teach me some really bad habits that took me a while to kind of kick. Like he's a rock and roller for sure. I mean, you know what I mean, the way he lives, but
Yeah.
he's just cool. Everything that he did had integrity, and like that's the thing. Like a lot of people don't they don't get what I do, and a lot of my fans just they don't understand, right? They don't understand, why'd you make this record when this record did well? Why'd you do this? Why don't you play this? And it's being with dudes like Joe Ely, who they just have their own ethics code. It's like a different code, and and he was always really cool. I love the way he did shows. He never canceled. Like he'd literally be like half dead. So I never
Right.
cancel ever. Like as a matter of fact, when COVID hit, I was like, yeah, we can keep playing. It'll be fine. And of course, that didn't
Yeah.
work. But I hate canceling. And yeah, those guys. I
It's
mean,
the
Joe
worst.
is.
I remember being a kid and having tickets and having a show get canceled, and you're just like, oh,
I know,
what the? It's such a disappointing feeling.
and it
It's gotta
feels
make
so good
people
to
feel
show
that
up.
way.
And I remember playing a show in Denver, Colorado, not that long ago, and we had it's a really long story, but basically, our van had died. We borrowed the van from these girls that were the friends of a friend of a friend. We left from there. This is in Albuquerque. And we went up into the mountains, and as you can imagine, the van didn't last very long. And we were up in Vail, and we had the main gig of the whole tour was in Denver. And we tried to drive the van from Vail to Denver, and we hit one of those big passes,
Oh yeah.
and the van dies. And this show was like this sold out show in Denver, and so we got on a flatbed truck. They put the van; it was a tow truck, and they towed us like 90 miles into Denver. And by the time we got there, we were like an hour late, and the whole crowd was waiting outside for us. And we got out of the tow truck.
You guys
And
weren't in the van, piggybacked on the flatbed.
I don't.
No.
We might. I don't actually know. There's a lot of us. I mean, it's a whole band, so maybe some of us were,
Matt,
which is
Matt,
completely.
he might have been brave enough to be in there.
Yeah, right. Drunk enough to be in there. But we jumped out of the van and played the gig, and I remember it was such a killer feeling, and the crowd was so stoked that we made it. When we got out of it, and I mean, when you're old and you're thinking back on it all, it's not going to be that endless arena tour you did. It's going to be shit like that, like nights like that you remember.
Right. I mean, my idea of a perfect venue is the showbox.
Oh yeah.
That's perfect. Although if I see a show with Christine, I would rather see a show in a theater because she's shorter than I am, and so that's always like.
And you're a gentleman.
Well, if it's a standing show and she can't see the show,
Yeah.
her experience is diminished, and then mine is also diminished because I'm worried about her enjoying the show, and so.
Hello, shoulders. Haven't you seen the 70s Mike Squires?
Then you're fisticuffs with the guy behind you.
I know. This is back before we cared about that, and it was all about just getting your groove on, man.
Right.
Now I know what you're saying. I feel the same way. Like that's the deal. Like, and I'm kind of in that space now. Like, I mostly play theater-sized venues where, like when I go tour, and that to me is making it. That's about what I want. I don't want to play arenas. I don't like when we were on, we hit this tour, we toured with ZZ Top forever. And we were on arenas and other bands too. We were just sheds, arenas. And it's the worst my band ever played. People that haven't done it have no idea. Unless you're the headline band and you're monitor engineers and all that,
right,
and you're dialed in and everything's badass. But when you're playing that and you're like the opening band, you sound like you're playing in a tin can. You can't hear the drums. You're literally if you're really into the pocket of the whole group, it feels so weird. And even when you watch the Stones, that's why they're so good. They've been playing stadiums for so long that nobody stresses. They're all kind of a little bit out of time with each other.
Right.
And there's these weird delays and stuff.
It defined their sound.
Yeah, they don't care.
Well, the other thing about traveling that way as an opening band is that you're in the tugboat, right? You're in the dinghy. They're in the cruiser, they're all on buses, and it might be a 16-hour haul to the next venue.
Well, we mostly did all that stuff in a tour. You can do it for a little while when you're 22, but
I've done it. It's terrible, right?
Yeah, I've done it too. I'm just saying most of that time we were on buses. That all just feels to me even though a lot of people when they're like, oh man, I remember seeing you, that was amazing, I get it from a fan perspective, because fans want to be validated by thinking that the band that they dig is making it. That's part of
Of
the deal.
course.
I get that it's cool to see people that maybe you liked early on killing it, but I'll take a same deal. The Showbox Packs Showbox show. Everybody's just, that's the deal, man. Like, and it's still that way. Like when I play shows, even though people are getting older, like when I play Antones, when I play like the Kessler Theater or Heights Theater, places where I play a lot, that's exactly what it feels like. And I'm like, that's to me, that's the shit. Like as long as I can get that energy, I would trade that, and as long as I can survive, pretty much over anything. That's a level that I feel like it's big enough where you've got good production, where it sounds good, where you can turn your amp up a little bit and play at the level that you like to play. But it sounds good. You got a good PA, you got professional people that know how to mix the room. The audience is close enough where they feel
You can
invested
make
in
eye,
the.
yeah, you can see everyone. That, you know.
Dude, I've seen some great. I mean, Showbox is not as much a part of my personal playing history, but going to shows, those have been probably my favorite shows in Seattle, have been mostly at the Showbox. A
Right.
couple of Numos too, actually.
Numos is great. I also love the Tractor. I played two. I
Yeah,
mean, the last two shows that I played, were this year. I played two
yeah,
shows this year there, and it was great. And it was
yeah,
great because that's a great venue, and there were great bands playing.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I had a great show at the Tractor too. Now I'm kind of, it's like whoop, the gears are starting to. I'm like, oh yeah, no, it's yes, it's great.
uh, but it's also a nice size place where you don't have to be quiet.
Yeah, it works good for a rock show. What's weird at the Tractor? Have you read that David Byrne book on music? Because that's a killer book about how the room influences the vibe.
I haven't, but
That,
it's now it's on
that
my list.
it's a good read. He talks about CBGBs and how that kind of cacophonous space created the right vibe for Talking Heads and Blondie and all the bands that were playing there. And like I think about that a lot because like when I do my acoustic shows, they're amazing. Maybe my best shows in the right setting. But where the Tractor gets kind of tricky is it's got that killer music room and it's got the bar side. And if you are either playing on stage or you're seeing somebody and you get people that are kind of drunk and a little chatty on the side,
Right.
that can really fuck up the show.
Well, there's that
And
whole brick wall that runs the length of the, you know,
yeah,
and it's untreated.
yeah, oh yeah, it can get real. I mean, I've both played a couple of shows. I remember seeing a Bonnie Prince Billy show at the Tractor that was amazing, and
I think I was there.
yeah,
It
they
was like
probably were.
2005,
I believe
6.
it. I have no, I'm the worst, dude. I have no
The
idea.
band was so good.
It was an amazing night. I remember he did this weird improvised tone poem thing at the end, but what I remember about it is that it was so packed that I was kind of over by the bar for the first part, and there were just and of course it was Seattle, so everybody knows each other, and they're all, "What's up, hey?" It was so loud I couldn't even hear the band like in that little area, and so I moved over in the middle of the room, and it was awesome once I got in the flow of the music. But that is a really big deal, and like the thing that's funny about people is that they don't realize what that feels like. Like it's like they don't realize because they don't realize how powerful they are. When you're in a 200 to 300 cap venue and you're rapping and there's any quiet, the band can typically hear what you're saying. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like if you have like a quiet moment where it's like, now I'm going to talk about my feelings for a second, this quiet part, and there's some dude like, rah, 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 and it like,
And then my boss fucking
yeah,
had the nerve.
yeah,
Like,
and it
oh.
people don't realize that, and it's a funny thing about performing is that I don't think that they realize how powerful they are, and it's a huge part of the night.
But it's always great when someone on the mic calls them out in a fun way.
It can be good, it can be bad. I've had some wins and some losses doing that.
Right. I think, I'm a Mark Kozelek fan, but I saw him be such a prick on the mic once
Oh
that I,
yeah,
I walked out of the room.
I've done a bunch of shows with him, and I'm a fan of his songs, is what I'll say.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's fair enough.
Yep.
I met him once on the street and he was perfectly nice. But man, I did not like him on the stage.
Yeah, that. Well, I try to not be that way because I understand I get it. It's funny, man. Like where everyone sits, like I'm a lot more blue collar about it all. I recognize that, to me, music is high art and it's like this spiritual temple. That's how I feel about it. But I also recognize that some dude that just worked his ass off for the whole week and he's got not a ton of money and he's putting his whatever money to come in. I'm not that pretentious where I don't think that dude, you know what I mean? I struggle with it because he can ruin the night single-handedly if he's
Sure.
obnoxious enough. But at the same time, I try to not be such a twat that I'm like, oh, it's my show, baby.
I love that you put an English accent on for that. For
Have
being
to.
a
Are you
twat.
kidding? It's my show, baby. That's just I was trying to imagine like a dude with an ascot, and it was, of course, with a British accent.
But with the not with a band, it's a little bit more. You can overcome that a lot more easily, right?
Yeah. That's why it's nice to have a volume knob.
Right.
People cannot talk over my band unless you're a really good talker.
Right. And you have a good band. Always.
Yeah, I do have a good band.
You got to have a good drummer, right?
Yes, I've had some killer drummers over the years. I mean, yeah, that's it. I don't produce a ton for other people, but when I do, I remember doing this one session here at my studio, and it was a good friend of mine, and he brought over his buddies, and like they were playing the songs, and it was like the first time where I was like, oh man, I'm gonna have to have that conversation, because the drummer's kick foot, he just was not. His kick foot was kind of random, and
right.
An okay drummer up top, but it's like none of that shit matters if that kick's not right. And I remember taking the guy aside, and it was kind of awkward because I was just like, you're not going to be happy with the results because I can feel what you're going for, and you're not going to get there because you need to build it on the foundation. And I think especially as kind of like a bluesy or kind of psychedelic guitar player, the way I play, so many of the little things that I do are kind of cues off of the drummer.
Right.
And the band, I mean, everybody in the band, but like a lot of the drummers that I grew up with, like they know how to set it up. It's cool. Like when I play with JJ, because he's played with so many good guitar players, like he just knows how, like when to go like double time on the hat or ride, or when to like, they're just little tricks that you learn when you've played with guitar players, because the best guitar solo is one where you don't have to do a lot and the band propels you forward. And it's funny when you play with a drummer or a band that doesn't know how to do that, you sound like a total wanker and you play the exact same solo.
Right.
So I'm very grateful to a good band. They make me look good.
I'm looking around behind you there, and I see mostly acoustic instruments and a semi-hollow and a couple electrics, but I don't see any basses. And do you fuck around with playing the bass on your recordings? And
Oh yeah.
have you ever played bass in a band?
No, and I've always wanted to. That's one of like. So here's the thing, man. Like Dylan says, you got to serve somebody, right? You got to pick a path. I love bass. I'm like, I haven't played as much lately because I've been really more focused on guitar again. But a few years back, like I was sitting like with that the Jamerson book and going through all those tunes and just, because then once you do that, you're all of a sudden like, oh, there's McCartney, because McCartney's like full on Jamerson, and then there's Bruce Thomas, and then all of a sudden you're in like early kind of like, stiff records, punk rock stuff. It's all that shit. I've got a really cool Precision, and then I got this one that I bought from this friend of mine in Austin, this guy Larry, who played with like Bobby Bland and all these soul people with that, and that's a '66 jazz bass, and that one's probably my favorite one.
He played with Bobby Bland.
I think he played with like a lot of soul dudes. Like he was,
Wow.
I don't remember. I'd have to ask Larry. I know he played with a lot of guys that were kind of like not in their prime, but were like dudes where you're like, you played with that guy. I'm like, he might have played with Al Green. I don't remember who
Wow.
he was playing on that circuit with like all the kind of badass living soul singers. And that was his bass. And I love playing bass. I mean, you gotta pick a path, right? You know,
Maybe.
well,
Sometimes you're
I have to.
right.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, my little Ian Moreland, just being in my world, is a full time commitment. I mean,
Yeah.
now that we're in COVID, I'm kind of like, that's what I was going to tell you. What was really interesting to me, I think we talked about this on the phone the other day. I think I've made more gains as a player since March than I have at any time since what I was talking about when I very first started.
Because
Because
your
I've never
focus is
had,
tighter.
what's that?
Your focus, right?
Way tighter. And like I can, it's hard. Like I've been really working at, and this is something I don't know, like if anybody ever talks about, but what's interesting to me about, what has been interesting to me lately about guitar is that like I said, for years, like when I very first started, I wanted to be kind of a jazz player. I was really into to Coltrane and the really heady shit, and I was trying to be this player in my mind, and then I got real turned off to that, and I got real focused on kind of like mostly pentatonic stuff. Like I didn't want to play a bunch of fancy shit. I didn't want to play like I like harmonic minor, some of that stuff, but I didn't want to play in modes, didn't want to do any of that stuff. So that's kind of how I built my style. And like all the players that I grew up with, even guys like Eric Johnson, they're really pentatonic players. They're not,
Right.
they don't play like, modes. I mean,
Right.
anyhow, when I got all this downtime, I was just kind of like, man, I'm going to revisit all that shit. I'm going to see what it's like to try to think of the guitar more cerebrally and really try to think of extensions and it's been a trip because when I read players that I really like that are really smart that play like that, it seems almost like they're different human beings than I am. It's much more brainy than it is. I like to keep it. So that's been really fun for me trying to experiment with trying to still play the way I want to play, but really thinking in terms of like more sophisticated voicings and stuff. So that's been cool.
Are there players that are not from that are not people that made impressions on you when you were starting out, people that have made impressions on you more recently that
Oh
you're
yeah, dude.
into?
I would like I said, like when I was struggling with, I went through a huge Hendrix phase, like, and still in it. I still think he's the greatest guitar player of all time. But when I started kind of like really struggling with that kind of Guitar Hero kind of trip, I was trying to find a way to still like guitar. And I got really into like television. I got really into like a lot of the more kind of post-punk type stuff.
Yeah.
I would probably say, like I said, Blake Mills is one of my favorite guitar players. I think that dude is like, I get really jealous of him because he's so cool and so good. I love Derek Trucks. I think that dude's amazing. That dude's just insane.
Yeah.
Probably my favorite living guitar player is Richard Thompson. I think he's just so like feels like he's playing on a razor. Like he's
Right.
just so like no effects, just weird whammy bar shit and vibratos and bends, and it's crazy trying and he's like probably the only guitar player where I've really done a deep dive and not been able to get a pretty good grasp on what he does. Like I've actually really worked on trying to emulate his style of playing and done a lot. And it's funny when you go trying to dive into Richard Thompson stuff, if you go online, you know how online you can learn how to play like Slash, learn how to
Right.
play like Eric Johnson. You can't learn how to play like Richard Thompson online. It's just hard to find his traction points because he's such a deep player.
Doesn't he
But
and his family host some sort of like guitar
yeah,
clinician thing?
I think Johnny Sangster might have gone to one of those. Um,
It's
uh,
here. It's like an hour from where I live.
oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, well, I probably should go to that.
It's upstate New York. It's crazy.
Well, no, I mean, there's so many great guitar players. I'm a big Nels Cline fan. I mean, he was one of my
Oh,
favorite guitar players. I mean, I haven't, not that I don't, I just haven't listened to him as much lately, but, I love like, I mean, I love everybody. I love the Edge. I I'm really into people like probably a lot of my favorite guitar players for a while were guys that used a lot of effects in the effects. Like I'm a big Johnny Marrs fan. Um, I mean, I don't love guitar. I love a lot of
Music.
acoustic players, Tommy Emmanuel,
Oh god,
right?
that guy's a fucking alien.
It's insane. It's insane, And then I love like up here, Johnny Sangster is one of my favorite players. Me and
Johnny
Fielder playing a
Johnny
million bands
Sangster
together.
recorded and produced the first Nevada Bachelors album, and it
I
was
didn't
like,
know that.
oh yeah, and he was so cool to work with. This was 1997. So cool to work with, and just like, he's so good,
Yeah,
and that was 23 years ago. Good,
yeah.
and I had only been playing guitar for like 3 months again. I had been playing. I didn't even own a guitar. I got a guitar to be in that band.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
I was playing bass.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
So I was really nervous to play in front of someone who could really play, but he was, you know, a
Yeah, well,
pro. Yeah.
that's what's cool about him is he recognizes that, there's no end, everybody's just different. Sometimes the greatest players are the rawest players, and there's a real value to every place on the spectrum. You gain something, I don't know if you lose something, but things shift, like I'm a much better player than I was as a kid, but, I'm sure that there's some things that have shifted, where,
Sure.
from you just play different when when you don't really know what you're doing.
For sure. I think that there's some of my best recorded guitar playing is on that album when I had not, not been playing for very long.
I have to listen to that. I haven't, I have to listen to it from that angle and here, cause that's what I guess the thing that I think a lot of people miss is that there's so much shit to learn. And it's like, everybody's so different the way they approach. That's the thing about guitar. Like people, it's kind of funny because guitar is a little bit passe in the current climate where like hip hop reigns and electronic music reigns. But I'm like, to me, the guitar is like, it's such a cool instrument because every single person sounds different on it still,
Right.
which makes me think that there's still a lot left in it. It's not like, Hendrix and Eddie Van Halen came around and boom, that's it. I mean, yeah, none of us are going to be that revolutionary with the instrument, but it's cool because like you pick it up, you're different. I pick it up, I'm different. We could listen to the same shit and try to be the same. We're still going to be different.
Right.
It really allows a lot of space for people to be themselves, and that's what I think is really cool about it.
I like that it's always a little bit out of tune too. At least
Yeah,
when I'm holding it is.
I was telling somebody a couple of days ago, like all my guitars that I keep around the studio. It's like, man, your strings must be really old. I mean, you must have to change them all the time. I'm like, when they break.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, when I'm on tour, I change my strings because obviously if you break strings, it's a bigger deal. But I kind of like all that. That's part of the fun, especially studio recording, is that little cranky, weird instrument can be this amazing, unique voice.
Right. I want to ask you some questions about your lessons.
Okay.
And get people directed over to get in touch with you if they're interested in studying getting some coaching and some guitar study through you, because obviously you have a deep knowledge to share. Had you taught before this time, outside of like your son, he's playing?
No, and I didn't even teach him. No, not really. I mean, I had a very short period of time when my kids were young where a couple of our friends were like, hey, my kid wants to play guitar. I tried that. I hated it,
Right.
And I just, because I'd be stuck with like these 12-year-old kids like,
When
and
you get a kid, when you get someone that's not into it and the parents
it's
drop them
terrible.
off and it's like a babysitting session, it's pretty awful.
Especially with this generation of parents where they all want their kids to be like, because they're all like post-punk people,
right?
That like were either in band, and so their kids are like so sick of it, and they're like, they just, yeah. So I did that couple of like months, And then I was like, nah, that's not my thing. I do a songwriting workshop every year, but that's a totally different trip, the way I approach it. So I've never done one-on-one before. And I started doing it basically when all my gigs got canceled. And it was insane because, like I said, I mean, all the things that you do, I'm not one of those guitar players. Like, as an example, like I got a call a year and a half ago to Emerald City Guitars, to go down there and play some of their expensive stuff to help sell it.
Yeah.
And anytime I do that, I'm always like, I never know what to play. And I know there's some guitar players that are great at just sitting there playing riffs.
Right.
But I really play more like to the song and what's going on. So it always feels weird to me. So it took me a minute to kind of like take the way that I play and what I believe and really break it down and kind of come up with a teaching method that I thought was cool. Because here's what I'm seeing with all this stuff on the internet. People can get anything, but not really.
Right.
That's what it is. Like, yes, all the information's there. So what I see is all these dudes that they get like the cage guitar method, and not that you can't learn really cool stuff that way, but what it ends up doing is these people just learn all these patterns. And even though patterns are what we all kind of use, they get stuck because then they don't understand. They're just playing these patterns up and down the neck.
It's like playing comping country licks over a chord change.
Yeah, and unless you really do it on the stand, it gets kind of stale. So what I kind of figured out is, like, I started, first of all, realizing what the style that I play, which is it's a pretty basic style at its core, but I've got a lot of, because I did grow up with so much blues and country and all this, got a lot of those probably hot licks without meaning to, that are in that realm, like pedal steel bends and that. But it's really based around kind of like the minor major pentatonic with chordal functions underneath it. Like, in other words, I'm playing around seeing the chords. And to me, that's kind of the sweet spot to me. Like, I think that's what I like. And I mean, I appreciate a guitar player that has a really deep understanding of advanced technique, but that just doesn't turn my crank. That's just not it. To me, just gets a little too cerebral. So that's kind of the way I teach, is like, I teach on how to kind of hone stuff down. And what's really been cool to me is focusing on phrasing and vibrato and bends, because everybody that gets frustrated, that's what it is. It's like, they're like, yeah, I'm just playing. It just feels kind of empty. I'm like, it's always the same thing. It's like taking it back, slowing it all down, and building it up with more feeling and connection. Because, like, I have a couple of guys, I'm working on this BB King song with a couple of guys. This, by the way, for anybody that hadn't heard it, BB King live at Cook County Jails, one of the most epic guitar records of all time. It's BB, like, just channeling some other force. I don't even know. And it's like, when I started breaking that stuff down, it's just like, it's not just an accelerator pedal of like building a solo from 0 to 100. It's like, there's moments where he sounds like a deer in the woods, and there's moments where he sounds like Godzilla destroying a fucking city.
Right.
And he does everything in this solo, and it's a blues solo. And that's kind of the thing. You start to realize the dimensionality of it, and that comes with touch and bends and vibrato. Those are all the things. They give it this very three-dimensional feel where it's not just a bunch of riffs. So that's kind of like, I guess, what I've been trying to learn how to teach. And the other thing too is two other things is finding ease. Like, in other words, guitar, especially, well, it should be a respite. It should be a place where you go to your secret playground that nobody else maybe knows about. And you can be whoever you want to be. So trying to put that there and not having that weird disconnect where it's just like, I'm going to be good, and all that ego, getting rid of the ego. That's the other thing that everyone seems to get stuck on, is like, guitar players can be so competitive, and it becomes this weird ego fest. And once it gets that way,
wait a minute, you're trying to tell me that guitar players have pissing contests?
Newsflash. I mean, dude, I could make a fucking art film on me jamming in small towns with guys playing Voodoo Child, and me just going dare, 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 and watching some guy going and I mean, like, literally, like, thousands of people, to the point that I didn't even want to ever jam ever again in my life. And I love jamming because it was like, this is not, and it's not like it's not like, oh, whoa, you're better than me. It's like, you totally don't even get it, dude. This would be so much more fun if we were interacting right now
Right.
and we were playing off of each other and building, and we could still play Voodoo Child.
Right.
It's just not, I'm not going to sit here and go,
Yeah.
That's the thing though. And I don't know what it is. I mean, why guitar players, I mean, I guess maybe we all saw too much Eddie Van Halen and he just fucking owned it, right? And
I mean,
smiled and looked awesome. And then everybody else is like, I want that.
right.
I don't know, man. But it's like, when you think about someone like Eddie, what is it that he had? What do you think about? Because I think about his smile.
Well,
I think about
joy. Yeah.
He just joy. He seemed so happy when he was playing. And I think that, as much as being this epic guitar player, is what sold it to all the kids watching him, is like, look at that freedom. And then all these players learn to play and there's no freedom. It's just, it's like a prison of ego.
Right.
So that's the other thing I guess I try to work on. That one's a little harder to work on.
It's only occurred to me in this conversation in the last 10 seconds that, and I've talked about this a little bit, like, Eddie Van Halen changed. He revolutionized not just the way people play guitar, but the way the industry was making guitars and amps and
everything.
Effects. He fucking changed the music and the instrument industry. But at the same time that all that stuff was in the wake of all that, that's when there was a very big blues revival as well, which is, very much not completely different, but very much different musically and sort of, spiritually, I guess. It's just like,
well, but it was funny because, I met Eddie, and when I mean, he was a huge, that's what's so funny about people. Like, people always think like he was a huge blues fan.
He was
you can actually hear it.
Like a notorious Clapton fan, right?
Big Clapton, and you can actually hear it in his playing. But the funny thing for me was coming up again as a kid. I mean, I loved Eddie Van Halen, like of course anybody did. But my scene was, I kind of had like blinders on to that type of music. So like when I was coming up as a guitar player and I started working with amp companies, I literally, like, it was like I was from Mars, dude. I could not. I was like, they're like, well, how much gain do you want? I'm like, no, it's not. It's not that. I don't.
You're
think
like
about
18 or 22 watts.
Yeah.
22 if you got them.
Well, no, I like the volume, but it was just a whole different and different vibe. Like everybody I literally started playing in like 87, 88, right around there. So you can imagine everything was modded Marshalls, this and that,
effects
and
loops,
and I was working with Fender at that time and like trying to get them like to just build me these simple, like nobody was building. The first guy that I worked with that was doing that was building some cool stuff was a guy named Bruce Zinke, and he was working for Fender, and he built the Tone Master, which was the amp that I used a lot during that time. And I don't know I'm sure he was working with a few different people on it, but I was talking to him a lot around that time because even that amp though was still a little bit too complex for what I wanted. And it's funny because now all the amps are kind of like what I wanted back then, but it took forever. Now it's like whenever someone's going like, what kind of amp should I get? I'm like, man, there's a billion great choices. But when I was coming up, if you didn't get like a vintage Fender or like, some of the cooler older Marshalls, you could, it was really hard to find anything. It was really a weird time for guitar because every builder wanted to build that modded, scooped out metal sound. That was what every single guitar amp builder built back then.
Is there any amp that you've ever owned and used that I would be surprised to know? Like, did you ever own a Boogie, or outside of like a Boogie, the first?
I've owned Boogies. I had like I had the Tremaverb because Charlie Sexton had a couple of those. Charlie's an amazing player. We all grew up together, and he bought some. So he was playing Tremaverbs for a little while, like the Archangels. And I remember I bought one for a while, or someone gave me one or something, and I liked it okay.
Yeah.
No, not really. I could, you know what I played for a long time? Well, so first of all, I started out playing a super reverb. And then as I got, out of kind of blues, rockabilly, more into like, more psychedelic rock and all that kind of bigger, heavy stuff with like fuzz faces and big muffs and shit like that, my super just could not take it. So then I
Sure.
kind of tried to grow the super into like this amp that would work with. And it's pretty funny. Like I wish my guitar tech, the guy that built all my amps back then, would work on them. I wish he's actually died, but we were constantly trying to like, what if we tried KT88s? And so
Right.
that my super reverbs were like these like crazy monstrosities. And then finally I'm like, I kind of hit the wall of what that design would do. And one of my favorite tones, which is kind of a split amongst people that like my stuff, my favorite amp was a Matchless Clubman 35.
Oh yeah.
That amp is fucking amazing, dude. I mean, loud as hell, but it really worked. I mean, and it was cool because I was getting into this more modal kind of Irish kind of sounding shit. So I could do these really cool, like open tuning things and have kind of not a distorted, but a distorted D sound. And it would just be amazing. But I could also play some of my kind of more, power trio-y kind of bluesy stuff. And like when I bend, it just had this clarity. And I love that amp. I sold it to my friend. And then when I did my Ian Moore Band reunion shows, which were with my band I had kind of early in my career, I built a replica of that and used that for the shows.
Really?
Yeah, and it's a great design. It's a really cool amp.
So
It's
I
the
want to
cathode biased EL34 amp.
I want to ask you some stuff about your builds because you've built amps, preamps, all kinds of outboard gear,
Uh-huh.
microphones. I'm assuming you've probably built a couple fuzz pedals.
Oh yeah, a lot.
Do you sell those?
I not I haven't built as much lately because everything like I don't remember. It's hard to remember when I was first starting to do that, but it felt like I had the time to do it, and then I don't feel like I have the time anymore.
Right.
But I got really, dude, I got super into fuzz pedals because once I started building it, everybody started sending me weird transistors, and I'd get like these crazy transistors from like Russia or like really good friends with a lot of pedal builders, like Robert Keeley would be like, "Hey man, try these and try these and try these." So I've got like bags of obscure. So I got super into like different types of fuzz, and I still am into different types of fuzz. So the issue is the reality of having a pedal board. Like I could have like 20 fuzz pedals on a pedal board,
Right.
and they're all different. I
And you
mean, they
can't
really
run
are.
one into the next either.
Yeah, it's so you kind of have to be kind of utilitarian. So I came up with a design that's the one I mostly use. I mean, I have a lot. I have like literally like 200 fuzz pedals probably. Some of which I've
Just
made, some of which
200 fuzz pedals.
probably. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot. I have a lot of recent Dunlop sent me a bunch of different fuzzes they used, all the different models,
Yeah.
prototypes. And then I have a bunch of way huge pedals. I have a bunch of random, like different, like boutique fuzzes. I have a bunch that I have built. Um, and I just kind of, I mean, the thing is the more that you play them, the more you realize that there's literally no fuzz pedal that does everything.
Right.
And then you have to decide what kind of fuzz do you really want. So what I came up with was this one that I think I have. I don't remember what I have on my Austin pedal board because I haven't seen it for 7 months. But I think,
Do you have a backline that just sits down there in a locker?
yeah.
Oh yeah, that's good.
I have a signature amp line. I've got two of those down there. I've actually got 3 amps that I built that are just sitting down there that I don't even use right now. But I think actually the one that I have, my fuzz right now is a George Tripp's custom fuzz that he built. He was prototyping when they were, when Dunlop. So Dunlop worked with Way Huge.
Right.
And George is the guy that tweaked all those for like Eric Johnson, Bonamassa, all the different. And so we just were geeking out one time. He's like, "Oh man," and he sent me this one, and it's pretty badass because when I play a fuzz, I want it to be like, well, I like a lot of different types, but I really like that legato-y kind of sound that really sounds more like a violin.
Right.
So I like that kind of sound a lot. If I
Would you
had to pick
associate
one,
that with like a little bit of a mellowed out big muff kind of style?
kind of, yeah. I just have this thing in my head that I never totally get. That's just this really cool, where it doesn't sound like it sounds like
It almost sounds like a revert backwards guitar.
a little bit. Yeah, really. Yeah, I love that. I love that probably from playing violin. And I'm a huge Eric Johnson fan. I mean, I don't listen to him a lot or like practice like those kind of that, but I love, and I'm not like a big, I don't like a lot, like I really like him because to me his sound has this gentleman's style sound to it
Very
that
much.
just makes my heart feel good. I don't really know how to, probably because I grew up with it, but I love that. That's kind of the sound like I want when I'm going for a fuzz. I want that real legato-y violin-y sound, kind of like what he gets, which I'm sure half of the guitar
Right.
players in the world are like, yeah, no duh.
It's funny. I don't even associate him with fuzz, but that's
Oh man,
his thing.
it's one of his things for
Right.
sure. Like, I mean, he's gone through so many. I actually had his fuzz face from Avia Musicom. He freaked out and sold it to me, and then he wants it back. He's been like totally like, "Hey, it's Eric. Can I have my fuzz back?" And I'm like,
I bought
I'm
it.
like, I'm gonna. I probably. I mean, probably it's his, but it's like, that's the fuzz. Like, and in a certain circle, most people don't give a shit about it, but in a certain circle of people, that's like holy grail material. That's like almost like Hendrix at Woodstock for a certain group of people.
But it's the one that he used.
Yeah, it's his blue one. It's got all these weird markings on it. And it's funny because it doesn't sound good to me at all. Because
It's probably not a good idea for you to have said that you have this thing in your garage. People are fucking nutty
I've
about.
got good security, man.
Yeah, no,
you know, and the thing, and here's the deal. It won't work for you. That's the thing, is like EJ's sound is so catered to his fingers, the way he plays, like he plays really light. Everything about his style is a thing that unless you play that way, which I don't, I play with heavy fingers, heavy strings. You know, all my stuff is geared to a very different type of playing. So it's interesting. Like I was so excited to get it. And I remember, oh, this is going to be amazing. And I turned it on. I'm like, I kept turning the gain up. I'm like, well, okay, you know. And I sent it down to George to because he wanted to replicate it, and he was kind of like, nah, it works for Eric, or it worked for Eric at a certain point where it just pushed the amps a certain thing, you know.
Maybe it's one of those. Maybe Eric pulled one of those Steve Jones things.
Yeah, right. Put it in a different thing and sold the
Put the
sold the
decal
guts.
on. Yeah.
Who knows? Who knows?
I
Yeah, that's what it
kid.
was.
I kid. That's incredible. So so clearly you don't sell fuzz pedals because you got 200 of them.
Well, I don't know that. I mean, maybe that's a little bit. I have a lot, but I have sold some, and I've given some to friends when I was building them, because I would make a run of, like, when you build, if like you do
Right.
PCBs, it's easy to make like 20 or 25 of them. I came up with this cool silicone design that's real stable that I thought sounded really good. And I built those for a while. And I don't even remember. I don't ever keep notes on any of this stuff. So I still have a couple of those. I have one, I think, on my pedal board up here. That's probably the fuzz that I use. You
But
know, like,
you never really explored building stuff as a
there's too many, there's too many good builders. I mean, like, I kind of got in that world for a second just because I'm into it. I'm kind of a geek that way. I love, like, I spoke at an AES convention, and I remember getting to meet like engineers that built gear that I use. And I was like, it was like meeting Elvis. I was like, oh my God, you invented the Pultec, that kind of stuff.
Right.
But those guys are, these guys are so good at what they do. And, I'm a guitar player ultimately. I mean, that's the thing I'm best at.
This is kind of like you making a batch of mead.
Or cider. I'm
Right.
making cider right now.
Right. I guess so.
It's
Yeah. Right.
It's gonna be pretty good, but is it gonna be as good as the dudes that I borrowed the cider stuff from? No.
Right.
But it's gonna be good because I made it, and I'm gonna drink it.
Right. There's a very particular satisfaction to that.
Yeah, I guess I that's something that the second half of my life has been kind of the defining thing, like getting under the hood, kind of like realizing that you can, with a little bit of effort and time, you can pretty much do anything you want to do. Like, building amps is a big deal for me because now when I'm on the road and something breaks and I'm in like Reno, Nevada, I can take it apart and most of the time I can fix it, and that's cool.
Do you travel with parts?
Yeah, I've
You
got a
do.
pretty good tech. Yeah, I keep like spare tubes and some resistors and caps,
You've got a
and I've
bit
got
of
a really
kid.
good. I've got a good tech kit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Nice.
Why you need a guitar tech?
No, I mean, dude, I barely need a guitar.
Oh man, yeah.
um, are you doing any? I know that you had the big show in Oklahoma that got canceled, which is a huge drag.
Yeah.
And the Smash thing is coming up, which I know you're very invested in that, and it's a huge thing.
Yep.
Do you have any streaming shows or anything like that you're doing?
I think I'm going to do a streaming show on November 5th. I've only done 4 during the pandemic. So I think this one I'm going to do I'm going to try cuz I've been just doing them on Facebook Live, and I'm actually going to try to port this one out to Twitch and YouTube just cuz people have been bitching to me about, some people have, those pretty badass systems where they can really put it on the speakers. And
Right.
the problem that I run into is that, like anybody, especially that's into gear, I really fine tune my sound, like everything. Like if I play an acoustic show, my pickups are badass. My way of pulling the sound out, like I know how I want to represent myself. And I still do that here. Like, I'm using this badass mic and good preamps. And then you port it into the computer.
And it gets compressed and then
Dude,
spit out
dude,
all over.
here's the best thing. We had a Zoom call. It was me, a bunch of my friends, Jesse Dayton, a bunch of musicians, I think mostly in Austin. And we were just kind of getting together, like talking music because we were like, it's right when everybody hadn't played for a while. And I played this song I was working on. And Jesse's like, oh man, I love that. What kind of phaser are you using on the guitar? And I wasn't using anything. It was this stupid, the way that we are doing Zoom like this. And it's the way that when you port audio into the program, the way it does bandwidth to accommodate the video. And it was modulating my so you spend all this energy, inputting this killer signal that sounds beautiful. By the time it gets in someone's living room, it sounds like Martians have invaded.
And not to mention that, let's be honest, at least half, probably more, of the people who are taking it in are watching it on their phone and most likely not with headphones, right?
Yeah. I'm like, I was just talking to a friend of mine before this, literary guy in San Francisco, and we were talking about the nature of, there's a lot I don't like about streaming. There's what I do like about it is that I like that I have something that I can do to make people feel better when
That's the
people
thing.
are bummed out. That feels good. I feel because like every time I do it, I feel super awkward because I can't see anything. It's just me like, hey, all right. And like between songs, I'm like just rambling about whatever the hell's. It's just like, and I'm like, how could anybody actually like this? But I think just the nature of seeing somebody playing music and you get the comments and
In real time as well.
yeah, and interacting to some degree and try. I mean, it is funny. Like I've been talking to other friends of mine that are doing it, and you're playing, and since your only interaction is with this comment stream, you're trying to kind of like play but not get distracted by the comments that are going down the left side of your screen. And then every now and again you'll look and you'll see somebody saying something, and then you screw up. It's like having your friends all like roasting you while you're playing.
Right.
But I'm glad. I mean, I cannot wait to play live again. I mean, I literally have not played music with well anybody since March, and I cannot wait to play with the band. I cannot wait to play electric guitar loud on stage. But I'm glad that I still have an outlet. I'm glad that people view it as important to them, and it is what it is, right?
Did you say November 5th?
Yeah.
That's a Thursday,
Yeah.
right after the election.
Yes. It's
So
either going to
man,
be
you're
a
gonna have some
celebration or
things. You're gonna have
it's
some
either going to
things
be
to
like,
talk
I
about.
got the blues so bad, or like, we're going to win this race. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you know what? I remember like, what's so cool about touring is like, I remember we did this gig in San Antonio because I'm like a tour out of Austin, and it was the Spurs. I'm a huge Spurs fan from when I was a little kid.
Sure.
Spurs are in the NBA Finals. I forget what it was, like Game 7, and we were playing in San Antonio. And so I remember talking to the club owner, and everyone thought the Spurs were going to win. It felt like they were going to win. They just felt real dominant. And so we're like, okay, we're gonna push the gig back a little bit. So we're starting kind of later, you know, and then the Spurs lost. And I remember, they literally lost the NBA championship. And I remember walking up on stage, and it was just like eternal, like balloon pop to just kind of everybody was like, brr, and trying to just kind of put on a good show, and just everybody was just hollow. So what I'm
Right.
hoping is that this is going to be a celebratory show, and in my mind, it's going to be a return to normality. Like I said, where again, all my conservative friends can make fun of me for being such a bleeding heart liberal, and I can make fun of them for being a
For
Keynesian.
being a loser.
Yeah, when we could just go back to the normal stuff
Right.
instead of the "I'm gonna fucking kill you, man." That's got to end. That stuff, that's no good. So
I live out here in America, like where
I
you tour, and there's a lot of big trucks and there are people who have, the back window sticker in a truck is this is how Hicks express their politics or their sexuality or whatever they do. I don't know. They say a lot of stuff in their back window.
What does the big American flag say about your sexuality?
Well, the thing is, that's a crazy thing. That never, like 4 years ago,
Yeah,
that
this is
wasn't happening. But
Yep,
there
it's
are a
new.
lot of big trucks flying giant American flags.
Yep.
And as a proud American and a veteran, like I don't want to be offended by that, but seeing it comes with the pretense that I know where they're coming from. And so I
It
know
is.
that I can't have a conversation with these people about it. I know that it won't be a reasonable conversation because it'll uh, quickly degrade into insults, and I can't do that.
I saw a car. I was just coming back from dropping my car off in Tacoma to get worked on this morning, and I saw the same thing. And I remember going, "It's so weird that I associate an American flag with this, like not repressive, like the government's repressive, but like I'm kind of a little uncomfortable being close to them.
It's
Not, I'm not afraid. My friend Tyone, who's a sailor, he was in Port Townsend, and he brought his boat in to paint the keel. He brought it in for the winter.
Yeah,
He's a white dude. He's like just a white dude working on his boat, and he's in the shipyard. And he said there were like literally 3 trucks with the big American flags, and they were driving around really slow through the boatyard. Like that, like what are you doing? Like, and he goes, and Tyone's a world traveler. He's not he's not scared or freak about.
yeah.
It was just like he's like after about the third time in about 15 minutes, seeing him drive slowly by, I started to kind of stop painting the boat, and I actually kind of was like looking at them when they went by to see what they were trying to do. And I just started to realize that, like in times when I've traveled, like going out to Jolene and I went up to Wenatchee to go fishing up in the mountains, and we had dinner, and we were coming back over this other pass, and it was the same deal as a bunch of dudes. And it's not like I don't give a shit, get together and do whatever you want to do. But they were sitting in this, come around this pass, and you have to go real slow. And it was this real, not like rah rah America, like awesome, but like rah rah disagree with us, motherfucker, because we'll kill you. Like they were looking for a fight. You
Right. They
could,
have stickers in their windows that look like the silhouette of an AR-15.
yeah, it was that kind of vibe. And they were kind of like, okay, say Biden's name, or say, come on, stop. And it was really weird. Like in all the years of touring, and I've toured, I used to have really long hair. I had a black dude in my band. I had a dude with a skunk, mohawk. I mean, we've
Right.
always been, weirdos, stopped by cops and stuff. I've never been scared. I mean, I've been scared for black dudes in my band
Sure.
in small towns in the South at times. I've never personally been scared ever.
Right.
I'm not scared. I'm used to being. I've toured the South since I was a little kid.
Right.
I'm not scared of that, but the vibe right now, I'm not going to say I'm scared of it, but it makes me feel like I need to be ready.
There's a lot to be uncomfortable about.
It's
and
a heavy
it
vibe.
sucks. It's really my favorite is the flag that says Trump 2020, no more bullshit. This is a real flag. Have you
Wow.
seen this one?
I have not
It
seen
says
that one.
bullshit on it, and they fly it in their yard, and it's ironic to me because I just feel like there's no more appropriate word to associate with Trump's name than
It's
bullshit.
It is.
But
it's amazing that people can see one thing so differently. Like it's truly
crazy.
one of the strangest things that's ever happened. I know. I get into it all the time. I mean, I just posted something a couple of days ago about voting lines in Georgia. It was
Right.
an NPR article that was about, and just all these, and just these guys, they're just baiting me. And a couple of the guys are guys I know. And this guy's like, why? Because one of the things was like, black people are historically less comfortable mailing in a ballot. And the guy's like, why are they less comfortable? I'm like, voter suppression and the fact that segregation just ended a little over 60 years ago. A couple of things
Sorta.
all kinds of like lynchings,
Right.
not like in the 70s, like, and he's like, why are they? And he just kept asking me the same question. I'm like, okay, dude, I
Right.
get it. I get it. You're trying to say that it's not true and you don't want to read the article and you're not going to read anything, blah, 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 whatever. I'm a fucking stupid liberal. I get it. Whatever. I don't get it. I don't argue with people from that angle. And my thing is not, even though of course I do think I'm right like anybody, I'm not trying to denigrate someone's opinion. My thing is like, okay, give me something to read that's not a meme and not from some weird source where they're purposefully manipulating everything, and I'll read it. Give me a book that illustrates something I really don't understand. But why don't you read How to Be an Anti-Racist in the meantime?
Or let's talk about it.
But the talking about it assumes that you have a level playing ground where both people are going to honor that there are certain things that are facts, but the facts have been destabilized to the point that facts are relative in a lot of people's minds now. And
There's
anything
certain things you can talk about that the outside world holds no relevance, like the golden rule, treat people like you want to be treated, and equality. Anyone who believes that humans don't deserve, that equality is not a human right, is fucking crazy.
Yeah,
anyone who's offended by the phrase Black Lives Matter,
it's just, well, again, I think there's a lot of very real problems that we have, and then the thing that I think a lot of people just don't want to admit, whatever is when you have a leader. I mean, I'm a leader. I was a Boy Scout leader with my boys. I've been the leader of my band. I mean, I'm not saying I'm like a big leader, but I'm a leader. I know what it's like to lead. When somebody in my band does something fucked up, guess what? It reflects on me. I don't go, everybody's always picking on me. It's so hard to be me. It's like if my drummer screws up and does something and, takes something or grabs a girl's ass or something afterwards, it reflects on me. I'm the leader. And as a leader, I have to own it. And yes, it sucks because I have to hold myself to a higher standard than my drummer. That's drummers for you,
sure.
Right? And but that's the reality. And so even in my little world of being a leader, man, I mean, come on, people that either maybe they've never been a leader or they have this weird version of what a leader should be, but you have to, when you as a leader act that petty and that weird, it echoes through everything, and everybody's destabilized. Even if you hate Trump, you're still destabilized by him because
Right.
his leading style is so weak, and it creates this weird vacuum that's really fucked everybody up.
Do you hear that racket?
I do. I hear a dog.
It's two dogs, in fact. Hey, you guys, cut it out. Thank you. My dogs are pretty good.
My dog's very bad, and I love him for it.
Yeah. Well, I think this is it.
This is the end.
This is the end.
The end, my friend. The end.
You're the best.
No,
I feel
you
like
are.
I feel like I didn't even ask you half the things that I wanted to ask you about.
I know. I think we just. I don't know how they normally go, but I feel like we just had the same conversation we had a couple of days ago on the phone.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same vibe, you know. That's how this thing goes. It's very casual, and I hope that it's just goes and has a natural flow, and we just talk.
I loved it. I hope as long as it serves your purpose, and I mean, I love guitar. I think the thing is that to me, the world is seen through the guitar, and that's kind of the deal. It's like there's a lot of shit. I used to make fun of like guitar players that were just super into guitars. Like it would be like if you were in a home building and you only ascribe to the hammer,
right?
Like because to me, like guitar is like so many things, and and it's whenever I'm talking about it, it's like far afield and this and that. So as long as it serves a purpose and people find it entertaining or funny or
people are gonna love this.
Cool. Well, tell them any of the bad stuff I didn't mean it, and the good stuff I'll take credit for.
That is the spirit of a true American leader.
Yes, exactly. The bad stuff was not my fault. Yeah, dude, it's good talking to you, man. Thanks for having me on. Hey, I got a question for you. A totally different question. This is very, very important.